Salutations, industrialists! I'm Mark, a producer on Gilded Destiny. In today's Dev Diary, we'll discuss how we've modeled rebellions and public opinion in the game. Gilded Destiny begins shortly after the conclusion of two of the most impactful revolutions in history, the effects of which were felt throughout the rest of the 19th century. By 1822, the great democratic experiment of the United States was well underway, busily setting about establishing the conditions that would lead to a rebellion of its own. In South America, the Iberian colonies were following suit, throwing off the yoke of their European monarchs. Meanwhile, in the Old World, memories of the French Revolution were still fresh in people's minds, spawning dreams of nation-states, egalitarian republics, fair wages, a brighter tomorrow, freedom and justice for all, and so on and so forth. At the same time, precarious living conditions set people on edge. A bad harvest could decimate the population, and the unexpected arrival of a new invention could make 90% of the workforce redundant overnight. Increasing literacy accelerated the spread of new ideas, many of them unfriendly to the status quo, as the oppressed began to realize the nature of their oppression and how best to end it. In short, the 19th century was a time of rapid change, and as such, it was an ideal breeding ground for the revolutionary sentiment, both for and against the changing times. We wanted our game to be able to reflect the complexity and variety of revolutions that occurred, and to do so in a way that allowed for dynamic rebellions that responded to how and why a country was changing. At the same time, we wanted to give the player different tools for dealing with revolutionary elements, depending on the kind of country they were trying to create. So, without further ado, it's time to go over how we've modeled rebellions in Gilded Destiny. To start with, we have Unrest. Every province has an Unrest value of 0 to 100, and when Unrest reaches 100, that triggers a rebellion, which means that a rebel army will spawn in the province. There is also the Unrest threshold, the exact value of which varies depending on the type of government you have. We'll go into this in more detail shortly. When the Unrest value is above the Unrest threshold, but hasn't yet reached 100, Unrest events may happen in your country. Unrest events usually give you a chance to try to get things under control, at a cost, before a full-scale rebellion actually happens. Overall, the Unrest system is designed to give the player multiple options when deciding how they want to deal with state control, as well as producing dynamic and realistic rebellions that stem from identifiable causes. At the same time, it is designed to limit the number of rebellions that will actually happen, while still making the maintenance of public order an important part of running your country. This means we can still represent the consequences of civil unrest without having the only result being a full-on armed rebellion. The two main drivers of unrest are low government support and pops with low happiness. As you'd expect, government support represents how much your country's current government has the support of the people. Without going into too much detail, government support depends on how much the government aligns with the political opinions of your pops. Whether it's instituted popular or unpopular policies, how it's faring in any wars, and so on. It's also something that can be affected by events and decisions, and sometimes you'll have to make difficult choices to maintain your government's legitimacy. This unrest is applied to all provinces in a top-down fashion. When government support is low, the unrest in all of your provinces will increase, as your people begin to lose faith in your government's ability to govern. Of course, the particular type of government structure your country has could matter a great deal here. A parliamentary republic that's close to election season may be able to avert a crisis if the reins end up being passed to a more popular party, whereas an absolute monarchy is rather more limited in its capacity for turnover. Unlike government support, which is a quality of the country as a whole, Happiness is a quality of individual pops, reflecting their general contentment with their current situation. Satisfying the needs of pops plays a big part here. A starving pop is not a happy pop, but so do things like cultural acceptance and religious freedom, national sentiment, working conditions, and so on and so forth. When the happiness of a pop is low, it contributes to the unrest of the province in which it is located. The size of the pop matters here. Remember that a pop can be any size, since it's just a way of defining a sector of society based on its culture, religion, and profession. See our dev diary on pops for more info. Since size matters, a very small pop isn't going to be contributing much to unrest, no matter how unhappy it is. It's much more likely that the pop will instead do something else, like migrate, rather than trying to go through the whole business of overthrowing the government, all on its lonesome. This unrest is applied to individual provinces in a bottom-up fashion. These are the two main drivers of unrest, but other factors can also come into play. There are times during the 19th century when revolution is just in the air, or forms part of a chain reaction that spreads across a continent. Europe in 1848, the springtime of nations, is one such example, where revolutions in France and the Italian peninsula spread to the UK and the states of the German Confederation. There's a reason why monarchies got a bit jumpy when their neighbors formed a republic through force of arms. Likewise, there are cases where an inciting incident is enough to tip the scales in what is already a precarious situation. In the Indian Rebellion of 1857, for instance, the rumor that the sepoys' rifle cartridges were lubricated with cow and pig fat is often cited as the eventual cause. But this was ultimately just one of the many sources of resentment and distrust that had arisen as a result of the British occupation. So, events and decisions can also contribute to unrest, and whether they're enough to push your population into open rebellion will depend on the pre-existing state of affairs when such events occur. Open rebellion, however, isn't always the inevitable result of a discontented populace. Often the symptoms of discontent will manifest before rebels seize the armory and actually try to field any kind of organized force. Most riots usually die out or result in some kind of compromise between the angry mob and the powers that be. This takes us back to the unrest threshold, which is the point at which a populace's displeasure actually begins to manifest. A proper rebellion only happens when unrest reaches 100, which is the point at which a rebel army will spawn and try to capture the city. The unrest threshold is usually going to be somewhere below 100 though, so it's in that window that you have a chance of getting unrest events, riots, demonstrations, and things of that nature. On the one hand, unrest events present the government with a problem, and often result in some damage or disruption to production and infrastructure. On the other hand, they also provide you with options for reducing unrest in the province, usually at the cost of resources or a change in policy. In other words, they might present you with the chance to give the people what they want before they decide to take up arms against you. Of course, it's up to you whether you give in to their demands. For instance, you may not agree with the Luddites that it's better to halt the progress of industrialization and smash up all the factories, or you may even want a rebellion to happen in order to oust a corrupt and inefficient government. The exact value of the unrest threshold will depend on the kind of government you have. A more liberal government will have a lower unrest threshold, meaning that riots and demonstrations will be more likely. But as a result, you'll have more opportunities to deal with any potential problems before they spill over into full-scale rebellion. A more oppressive government, on the other hand, will have a higher unrest threshold, since people will be more wary of publicly voicing their discontent. However, there will be less advanced warning as a result, and the rebellion will be more severe if it does happen, since rebels know that they can't expect any quarter. So overall, there's a trade-off involved, depending on how you want to run your country. and how you want to deal with the challenges that this will present. That is, dealing with the occasional riot may end up being less costly in the long run than having to pay for a peacekeeping army to hover around your troublesome provinces. Now that we've covered how a rebellion happens, it's time to take a look at what happens when your people finally do take up arms against the government. All pops that are contributing to unrest within a province will have an ultimate rebellion goal, which indicates how they intend to change the status quo. Political rebels want to overthrow the country's government and put a party in power that shares their political opinions. Nationalist and separatist rebels, however, are more concerned with their specific province and want to break away from the country altogether. Generally speaking, nationalists want to join an existing country that they feel is their true nation-state. This is dependent on the rebels' culture. Separatists either want to form their own country or return the province to its previous owner. This is dependent on which countries consider the province a core territory, although this can include countries that don't currently exist. If that sounds confusing, don't worry. The short version is basically that political rebels want to overthrow, while nationalists and separatists want to break away. When unrest reaches 100, the various rebel goals that exist in the province are evaluated in terms of which goal has the most unrest contributed towards it. Rebels who are in support of that goal will then spawn a rebel army within the province. The goal of the rebels will then determine their behavior. Political rebels will attempt to march on the capital, using any excess forces to occupy whatever additional provinces they can. Nationalists and separatists will attempt to take hold of any provinces which they consider part of the country they want to join or form, depending on the majority culture in the case of nationalists or the province cores in the case of separatists. If the rebels are able to hold on to their intended goal continuously for a sufficient period of time, the rebellion succeeds. For political rebels, this results in the current government being replaced with one that aligns with their political opinions, and the enactment of whatever available policies are supported by the new government. For nationalists and separatists, this results in transferring the occupied provinces to a different country, either one that already exists or a new country that is founded by the rebels themselves. If the rebels have formed a new country, that country is automatically at war with their former overlords. If the rebels have joined an existing country, the country from which they seceded gets a casus belli to retake those provinces. Since there are different types of rebels, you can potentially skew things so that if a rebellion seems inevitable, you may be able to get the kind of rebels you want. Rebels with different goals will fight if they encounter each other, while rebels with the same goals will assist each other. So it's sometimes in your interests to try and ensure that the provinces don't all produce rebels with the same goals. In the Unrest interface, you can keep track of which rebels are currently contributing the most to unrest in each province. Invaluable information if you are deciding which provinces you need to placate when your resources are limited, and where you might want to station your available military. Gilded Destiny's Rebellion system is designed to create emergent narratives of revolution that are both engaging and realistic. However, there are several famous rebellions that will have additional scripted content to provide the kind of depth and complexity that these historical events should present. These events will still work with the system, and of course, we wouldn't want to make them entirely unavoidable, because where would the fun be in that? We've already touched on a couple of examples. During the Springtime of Nations, revolutionary sentiment sweeps across Europe, but some countries are able to weather the storm without facing open rebellion. Likewise, even though the Indian Rebellion has its inciting incident, that incident on its own may not have broken out into armed conflict if the conditions had been less fractious. As with anything, There's a balance to be maintained between ensuring that there is sufficient historical content that does justice to the particular events of the period, and ensuring that the game's systems give the players sufficient freedom to alter the course of history in a realistic way. Therefore, the overall intention behind Gilded Destiny's Rebellion system is to capture the ways in which revolutionary sentiment tends to build up from multiple causes, while giving the player multiple different options when it comes to running their country. We hope you've enjoyed this dev diary, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, don't hold your horses and trot down to the comment section below. Lastly, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you have not done so already, add Gilded Destiny to your Steam wishlist. Until our paths converge once more, we bid thee farewell. May your destiny be a gilded one.